evening and welcome to the January 8th edition of Beyond the Headlines. I'm your host, Colin Dowe, and let me start off by saying I wish you all a happy and healthy 2024, wherever you may be joining us from, in your living rooms, in your various places of gathering, whether it's on GBN Radio, GBN TV, or any of our social media platforms. And I'm certain that the GIS likewise will be covering this edition of Beyond the Headlines. Welcome, and we certainly look forward to an informative day or evening of conversation. We're going to be doing 2023 in review, looking ahead at 2024, and also having some discussions on the celebration of Grenada's Golden Jubilee of Independence. And the guest in studio is no other than the Honorable Prime Minister himself, Dickon. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Colin. It's a pleasure to be here, and let me say a special good evening to all of the citizens of Grenada who are tuning in to Beyond the Headlines. I want to take the opportunity to wish everyone a healthy and happy 2024. I think it's going to be an exciting year, and I look forward to continuing to serve with my team, the citizens of this blessed land.
All right. It's just about a year ago we had our first conversation, yes. And I was, reflecting on it and some of the questions that we asked as you were projecting, because you were coming out on that occasion of your first budget and looking forward to your first full year in office, really being in charge there, so to speak, of the nation. And as you reflect on 2023, share with us, so what would be the three things you would say you're most proud of in terms of your accomplishments of your government in 2023?
That's a pretty interesting question. Well, I think I would start off by focusing perhaps on education. I think we've rolled out a number of initiatives geared towards increasing access to education, as well as beginning the process to address the skills gap that we know we need to tackle, both on a short-term, medium, and long-term basis. So I think from a government perspective, some of the initiatives we've taken on board in education, some of those that we're quite happy about, and we could just give simple examples like the free tuition policy for TAMCC and NULO as a prime example of that. I would say, on a general level, I think our governance has certainly inspired a lot of Grenadians to care more about their communities, to volunteer their time and to get involved in community building and nation building. Mm-hmm. And I think that can only happen if the government itself leads by example and gives the public the opportunity to take part in the discussions, in the consultations, if people feel inspired themselves by the example that we are setting. So I think for me, that is a very critical part. It may not be something that is tangible, but I think everywhere we go, people are free to criticize the government, they're free to comment, they're free to get involved. And I think that is a critical aspect of nation building as we go forward, and it's something we need to sustain, because as citizens we need to be proud of our country, and we need to want to be able to take part in that as well. I think from a general, I'm giving very general responses, because I think it's difficult to narrow down on any one specific initiative. I think generally our management of the economy is also something that I think we are quite happy with, not just from the perspective of economic growth, we've had that, but I think from the perspective critically of addressing the social needs of our citizens, because we recognize that there are still many persons who are less fortunate and who still need to be addressed. So I think a lot of the initiatives that came out of the 2023 budget was geared to address those issues, and we are obviously going to continue that in 2024. So for instance, you recognize that we've kept the zero-rated list. We've added to it, not only have we added to it, we've added all of those items on that list to the price control list, and that is because we recognize that they're key items that are important to the citizens of the country, and so the cost of living is a major issue that we still have to tackle. And so just making sure that the social cohesion in the country is maintained and the unity of the country is maintained is also critical. We have address issues that persons have hitherto not addressed. For example, October 19th. I think the response of Grenadians, both in the diaspora and at home, and the international community as well, because I think we've forgotten how impactful the period of 79 to 83 was, not just on Grenada, but the region and internationally. So I think as a government, we were quite happy that we were courageous enough to take the decision to recognize the 19th of October as a day worthy of national remembrance. So I will probably stop there on that part of the question.
Okay, so I hear education, and you led with access to education. I heard management of the economy, and certainly shoring up on some of the safety nets program. And I heard people's participation and the pride that expressed through the volunteerism, or the increased volunteerism that we're seeing. If I am to flip the question and ask for two things you wished you would have handled differently in 2023, what would those be?
Those are tough questions. I would say from the perspective of how long it takes to get things done. It's a learning curve. For example, I come from the private sector, where I think decision making is just simpler, and it's more straightforward. And so sometimes you can get a little frustrated with how long it takes to get things done in the public sector. But I think what we have to do is to first learn why it takes as long as it takes, and then how do we go about improving it. And sometimes we don't take sufficient time to understand the why it takes as that long, and then you kind of want to, I don't want to use the term bulldoze, but you feel literally that you need to do so to get things done. So it does mean, in a sense, that we have to understand why there's a bureaucracy, what the checks and balances that we need to make sure is in place, and what are those that we don't need, so that we can get more efficient and effective decision making, and crucially more implementation. So I would say, and in a sense you can see we're seeking to address that in 2024. Procurement is an issue within the government, both in terms of I think the existing legislation is a little bit cumbersome. The limits on spending that one has to have multiple, in a sense, potential suppliers for before you can make a decision. The process from actually selecting to getting to the procurement board to getting back, many times you have delays there. So I think, in a sense, we perhaps should have spent a little more time early o'clock understanding and learning that process, and trying to correct it, to address it earlier. And to that extent, we are seeking to do so in the first quarter of 2024. That's one area. The second area, I would probably say, as much as we recognize that there was a lot of hurt in the public service, and we sought to address this from the pensions and so on, there's also the question of training. There's also the question of functionality, and making sure that, in fact, we have the competencies that are required. And there's also the question of recognizing that the society has changed dramatically than from 50 years ago. And so the demands that are made on the public service is significantly increased. The demands that are made on government in general is significantly increased. And we need to make sure that the government can actually deliver those services. And so, in a sense, not just right sizing, but making sure that we get and retain the right competencies within the public service is something that I think we will have to spend more time on in 2024, if we are able to deliver, if we are going to deliver on some of those initiatives. And it may mean, for instance, in some instances, finding creative ways to get the services delivered, or the goods delivered, or the initiatives done. But that is part of something that we must address, because if we don't, it's all well and good to have nice ideas, but if we can't implement it and we can't find ways to implement it, then obviously we will come up short.
Right. And reflecting again on 2023, what aspect of your leadership would you say you would need to improve in order to accomplish the things that you project for 2024 and beyond?
Yeah, really putting me on the spot. That's a good question. I mean, I think, for me, if I speak on a very personal level, obviously I do a lot. And I think I have to be careful that we don't spend too much time in weeds, and that we keep our eyes on the big ticket items that we in a sense indicated to the population we would deliver on. And I can give you a simple example. I mean, you are what you do. So for example, if we say healthcare is a priority, and we are going to deliver on the teaching hospital, then I think it would be fair for the citizens to ask me, how much of your daily time do you spend on this project? And if when I audit my daily time, I see a month has passed and I haven't spent any time on it, then the real question is your actions aligned with the commitments that you've given? So I think for me, that's one of the things I have to be mindful of, because obviously as a Prime Minister, I get pulled in a million different directions. Right. And I need to make sure from a leadership perspective that I'm also very clear on what are the big ticket important objectives, what are the issues we campaigned on, what's the mandate we've gotten, and to make sure that we stay focused on that. So I would say that's probably the one main thing I would flag, and I have to be mindful of to make sure that I don't try to do too much, and then you end up not accomplishing anything.
I'm happy you use the term the healthcare as your example, because I'll quote you from your first budget. Transforming our healthcare system is the single most important priority for this administration. That's a quote from 2023. So you began 2023 budget presentation focused on health and wellness. What was the major accomplishment, you would say, for healthcare in 2023?
Well, I don't think it's a single major accomplishment. I think, one obvious one would be we've acquired the 83 acres. I always sometimes misquote the exact acreage, but let's say thereabouts 80 acres of land in Calavini for the hospital site. That's a very tangible thing. That is something that's important, because hitherto there's been a lot of talk, but if you don't even have a site, we know you're not going to have a hospital. Right. So we've acquired the site, and that's the start. I think the more medium to long term, for instance, we obviously paid nurses an extra $500 per month. We've kept that on, and we're going to be paying the doctors an extra $1,000. But to some extent, these are band-aid issues, but it's also signaling that we recognize the need to address the terms and conditions of healthcare professionals throughout Grenada. What we've begun to do, I think, by those initiatives and by looking at our healthcare sector in totality, we've had the National Health Insurance, which we've contracted with Dr. Ned and his team to bring back and to continue to work on. What we recognize is that you have to have an entire ecosystem, right? And the commitment to doing that, and particularly to bring in private capital into healthcare, is going to be crucial. So we recognize this is not something that's going to happen overnight. We've already had significant interest from all over the world, not just about the hospital, but about the operations of the hospital. And we recognize that is actually more critical, or then we might still keep the existing hospital at PR. So we recognize we have to come up with the right financing model that would allow the hospital to be successful. And that means we have to have the public-private partnership. It means the government is going to have to commit some of its funds. We already have the site, but it means crucially we need to get a private operator who's going to operate the hospital at the standards that will make it an international hospital, that is one that is accredited, that then allows us to leverage what we have, the relationship we have with SGU, and more crucially, build up the ecosystem around healthcare, not just as fixing people who are sick, but healthcare as a profit center, as a business model that ties into our tourism, etc., while at the same time ensuring that we make the necessary investment in education, in training, in letting our population know the career opportunities that are there in the healthcare.
Well, not just this is where I want to go. So let's focus on the hospital for a bit. What steps were taken in 2023 to answer the very questions that you raised? How is it going to be financed in terms of construction? Who is going to manage? What will be the primary facilities that would allow it to be that profit center? And related to that, if Grenada is to be a health tourism destination, what type of studies are being conducted so that we position ourselves appropriately in the marketplace?
So I don't want to give sort of detailed responses to that, simply because in a sense the research and so on is still being undertaken, and it is going to be a consultative process that will involve the public. We envisage that by the first quarter of this year, as part of that research, that we are going to have what I call a national health symposium that is going to involve us not just speaking with our citizens or healthcare practitioners, but in fact the international and regional community, as well as investors who are potentially interested interested in investing in the healthcare sector. Because as I said, it's not just the hospital, it's not just the physical building of the hospital. We've had several entreaties, several persons have approached us. We obviously have to create the framework. So where we're at is, one, we're in the process of concluding a contract with a consultant who will help us manage all of this. Because you can well imagine I will get bombarded with 15, 20 different persons wanting to make proposals. Clearly, I can't decide that. So we need to have the expertise that first of all coordinates all of that, that is able to jump on a plane and fly all over the world, look at all of the options, look at what people are recommending to us. We have to have a backstop, because even if you have a consultant who's working for you, we want to benchmark what his recommendations or advice is against what the World Bank may say or the IFC may say. We are also working with the Tony Blair Institute. We have signed a memorandum of understanding with them, which is giving us 6 months free consultancy. Their representatives are on island, and that's one of the projects they're assisting us with. Again, to help us with looking at benchmarking, what are the models that operate, what are the do's and don'ts, what are the things we need to look out for, where has the PPP models worked, who are reputable players, who are not reputable players, how do we fit national health insurance into all of this, how do we fit medical tourism into all of this, how do we leverage SU into all of this, how do we make sure that whatever model we are looking at recognizes what are some of the chronic medical conditions that Grenadians suffer from, or hypertension, or diabetes, or heart problems, or cancer, and how do we ensure that we begin that dramatic change at the primary healthcare level as well. So all of that, as you can see, is a massive mammoth undertaking, and then you have to gather all of that data and be able to sift through all of this. So the idea is that all of that desktop research has to take place, all of that consultation has to take place, the engagement with our local medical fraternity has to take place, the engagement with the diaspora medical fraternity has to take place, the engagement with SU has to take place, potential NHI partners, not just a consultancy, but who will operate, what model we operate, bring all of that together, and then ultimately with the nation as part of what I would dub a national health symposium that may run a day or 2 days or 3 days, very much in a similar manner in which we had the creative symposium. Right. The idea will then we do this, and then we have the options or recommendations that could then be presented to cabinet, presented to the nation, and then we then get into a next stage where we would then have what I would call more or less the final decision making as to this is the model, this is the roadmap, this is how we think we will fund it, these are the likely operators that we will speak to, and then ultimately get us to a point where we have, in a sense, or we start approaching contract stage, both in terms of operator, in terms of finance model, in terms of contractor for construction, that sort of thing. We envisage this to roll out, frankly, in all of 2024, to get us to a point where in 2025 we have operator selected, contracted, who will then obviously guide construction, etc., etc. We understand what the HR needs are going to be at a minimum. We can tie that back into our own education policies, whether it's scholarships, whether it's path scholarships, whether it's just career path in terms of making more and more Grenadians, as well as perhaps even more regional counterparts, have our young people study areas that we know we will need to fulfill. So it's going to be a pretty significant, in our view, transformative health industry, health sector creation. We also have to look at our fiscal incentives, because as it stands now, our fiscal incentives to a large extent are tourism driven, right? Or what I would call traditional business driven, agriculture, etc., etc. We do not have any fiscal incentives that specifically targets the healthcare industry, right? So if we want to have persons coming here and engage in medical research, what are the incentives for coming? Let's take our doctors. Most of our doctors are general practitioners. How do we incentivize them to become specialists and come back? There's no fiscal policy in place that treats with that. So we're going to look at all of the examples. There are places like Malta, which has some of these policies in place that allows them to have their citizens, particularly the doctors, specialize and come back. So we're going to be looking at all of those models to see which ones will best fit for us, and to take it from there. So as you can imagine, I'm not a healthcare professional by any stretch of the imagination, but we recognize that from an opportunity perspective, we feel we are uniquely placed in the OECS and certainly within CARICOM to really capitalize on some of our strengths, or relatively low crime rate, safety, friendliness of our people, the pristine and pure nature of Grenada, St. George's University, or a significant medical diaspora, the fact that many persons would like to retire, but we have not put in the health infrastructure, because once you're talking retirement, you're talking healthcare, right? And we don't have the fiscal incentives regime in place as yet, or the legal regime in place to address that. So we recognize all of those things have to be put in, but we are going to go hard. But we will be prudent. We will certainly engage and keep the public informed. So of course, step one, we've disclosed that we acquired the site. Step two will be to conclude the consultancy contractual arrangements and announce who that consultant is, announce the terms of reference, the work the consultant is expected to do, the time frame within which is expected to do, when we expect to have national ramped up consultations on this, particularly with our local healthcare professionals. But in the meantime, there are a number of other things we are doing to start supplementing health.
And as you speak to that, because I would like you to speak to that, any initiatives in gaining the additional human resources that are very needed for the population's care? As you said, the majority of our practitioners are GPs. What are we doing? One, for specialists. Two, for the allied health areas, which we are scarce in terms of resources as well.
Right. So I think a couple of things. There's a traditional, for instance, the traditional approach in addressing the lack of specialists has been our reliance on our friends from the Republic of Cuba, and we are obviously eternally grateful for the tremendous help and support that they've given to us over the years. But we also recognize that can't simply be the be-all and end-all of how we address this, because our friends in Cuba also have their significant challenges based on the external circumstances that they have to treat with. So we recognize one starting point is to tap into a diaspora, right? And in very much a similar model as we currently use with our friends from Cuba is in fact to create that rotational model where specialist doctors in the diaspora can come in, rotate out, and start filling the gaps that we have where we don't have specialists in any particular instances. So we're hoping to roll that out throughout 2024, and it's probably going to be cheaper because they're Grenadians, they likely don't need accommodation, their families live here, they can put them up. More often than not, they're happy to volunteer if they're coming from vacation, etc., etc. They will pay for their own tickets home. And what we really need is to have a system in place, and particularly address what is the specialist needs we need, so that we can in fact allow that to happen. So that's one of the ways we intend to, and we don't just see this as a short-term fix, because we recognize with telemedicine, for example, that is an opportunity both for telemedicine and for Grenadians in the diaspora, as I said, to actually have a firm rotational basis where they can come in, give us the expertise, and then go back, and then obviously they can continue the conversations, the telemeds with their colleagues in Grenada in terms of treating patients, etc. So that's one of the things we intend to pursue. Even during 2023, we had, for example, a Palestinian brigade of doctors who came in and provided medical assistance. As you may be aware of, things like chores, their smiles, which they come out of Canada, made up of Grenadian and regional medical dental professionals who come in. So we intend to continue that, because we recognize that we have to beef that up as much as possible, and in a sense formalize and make it more structured and more predictable, so that we can definitively say to our citizens, for example, there's specialist dental care or specialist X care during the particular month, so that our GPs can refer persons for during that period. So that's one way of addressing that issue. In the meantime, there are a number of other initiatives that are taking place. This evening, I was fortunate enough to be with Dr. McKinney, who cut the ribbon to the McKinney Foundation, which is a clinic open at the GIDC complex by Dr. McKinney. Dr. McKinney is one of the first students, or the earliest students, of St. George's University. He's opened the clinic. He's a specialist OBGYN here, essentially giving pro bono services to Grenada. He set this clinic up. Again, the idea is to model it on the very basis of what I just said. There is a significant SGU alumni who are prepared, ready, willing, and able to deliver and to give back to Grenada. So when we have someone like him coming in, setting up this clinic sort of sets the foundation for for other specialists to come in and use the same clinic to provide their services and so on. So this is, in a sense, the kernel that has been planted, and we expect that to blossom into a full-fledged, what I would call SU alumni give back to the citizens of Grenada. So that's another way we intend to sort of supplement the immediate. But going back to our doctors, our local doctors, we've begun the engagement with them. We've had some extensive discussions. They've proposed some brilliant ideas as to how we address retaining them for one, because that's the starting point. We all accept that the compensation package is woefully inadequate. And as they've said to us, if that issue is not addressed, all we are doing is training, we become a training ground for them to move on to greener pastures, and obviously we don't want that. So they've given what I call practical, sensible, fiscally prudent solutions to how we begin to retain them and how we encourage them to become specialists so that they can come back. And we certainly intend to sit down with them to flesh these out. It's part of the task of the new Minister for Health and his team to really begin to address that. And we want to let the healthcare professionals know in Grenada that we take the recommendations that they've made to us seriously. I was very, very heartened to hear them talk about the statutorization of the hospital. Because I think my sort of instinctive reaction is that they may have been resistant to such a notion, and they're the ones who raised it. And I think it's because they recognize that the current public model simply cannot pay them the kind of compensation that they require, and it's not designed to capitalize on any revenue base or models that are there. As we give the examples, if someone could pay for healthcare, if they have health insurance, our system doesn't permit it right now. You can go to a private doctor, you can use your surgical card. You go to the hospital, you can't use your surgical card, right? So you have significant leakages in our public only funded medical system. So I think they recognize that with a statutorization of healthcare, it certainly allows for those who can pay to pay, which means therefore you get a revenue base, which then allows us to address everything from maintenance, procurement, supplies, to the terms and conditions of our healthcare professionals, while at the same time ensuring that there are regulations and limitations in place to ensure that those persons who are unable to afford still have access to the same quality of care. So I certainly think particularly the junior doctors or the young doctors recognize the need to be flexible, to be innovative. I think they recognize there has to be, in a sense, a wholesale review of the legal framework and the policy framework within which medical professionals practice, so that we don't keep losing them, and so that they can really help us to transform the healthcare sector. So we are committed to working with them, to listening to them, to sharing our thoughts. So the engagement is going to be, there's going to be a greater collaboration, greater engagement, I think certainly in the first half of this year, to ensure that we can get the right policies in place going forward. But from a policy perspective, we recognize that our scholarships, where we actually put money, the areas we put money in, is something that's going to have to be reviewed. We've set up a cabinet committee to look at this, because if we are talking healthcare, if we recognize the dire shortage, and I haven't even gotten to the nurses, the nursing assistants, and I'm mentioning them because I don't want them to think I'm only talking about the doctors, but we haven't even touched that layer. And obviously, the shortages are well known, well documented. It's chronic. Then obviously these are areas that needs employment and investment. It therefore means our education system should be reflecting that as early as possible, which means we are going to have to deliberately invest in those areas. We will not be able to keep everybody here, that's fine, but we must be able to keep significant enough numbers to allow us to do the kind of transformation that we want. So that means at the cabinet level, we are reviewing government's entire scholarship policy, so that the scholarship policy could be twinned more to the sectors that we see we prioritize. And it goes back to what I said earlier about, if you say healthcare is a priority, how much of your time are you spending on healthcare? How much resources are you devoting to it? How much engagement, consultation are you having? So we recognize that there has to be significant improvement from a policy level as well in those areas. But we are confident it will take some time. It takes a lot of consultation, transparency, explaining, listening, adjusting, accepting criticism, and correcting if we need to. But I'm confident 5 years from now.
Oh wow! I thought you were telling me 2024. But I am looking.
Those kinds of issues can't be solved in a.
No, but I am looking for a revamp of our national priorities, and those being tied to scholarships. That's a reasonable request for the very same reason.
For the very same reason, yes. If the state is educating you, I mean, there has to be some conditions to the education. If you're not paying for it, and it can't just simply be that you pick any pursuit that has no relevance to our development, no relevance to the dire areas that we need bodies in. So in that sense, I think we would be justified in saying, well, we are not trying to stop you from pursuing any particular career, but if the state is going to give the scholarship, we must have some say in terms of where we channel the resources. And to my mind, since healthcare affects everybody, that's one obvious sector that we need to.
Speaking about what affects everybody, just before we take our first break, almost every Saturday there's a motorcade, and I must confess, whenever I hear the DJ at the back of the truck, I said, there goes Grenada NHI.
Right.
It's unfortunate and it's really saddening. Will we see a deliverance of NHI in 2024, or a minimum of a framework towards setting up the national health insurance?
Right. So the timeline we have for the commencement of it is 2025, give or take. That's about, I think, 24 months from November of 2023. So we expect in 24 months to be in a position where NHI is being implemented, right? And it is not just there goes NHI, but the reality is all of that funding that we are trying to raise with the motorcade and the block O and the fundraising is to spend the money outside of Grenada. Right? Because we either don't have the facilities or don't have the specialists within Grenada. Up to last night, Minister Williams and I was on the phone looking at how we help this family who has this young child that has a significant, I think, ailment with, I believe it's the child's liver, and as a result, the child's stomach is growing abnormally. And I was, calling around persons who indicated that they were prepared to pledge and so on. And again, we're doing so because we can't treat the child in Grenada. It means even if we raise all the funding, even if we had the money, so even if we have the NHI, right? If the NHI is going to be spent, if we're going to take Grenada's NHI card and then you have to go to Trinidad or Barbados or Jamaica, then we continue the same thing. So that's the reason why it's hand in hand. If we have NHI, we also have to beef up the services that are available so that more routine things can be handled in Grenada. But we are committed to NHI. I mean, Dr. Ned and his team who's leading this process have always said we pay insurance for cars, we pay insurance for homes, for property, public liability insurance, all kinds of things. Golf insurance, if you play golf, but we don't have insurance for our health. And it's something that we are committed to. Because
so in terms of this particular contract, we deliver both a model that speaks to funding for financing for NHI,
yes,
the basket of services that will be provided, etc. All of that is part of this.
All of that is part of the scope of work. Yes.
Okay.
Right. I mean, obviously, as a government, we have to partner and work and provide all of the support to get that done. But NHI is our initiative. It's an initiative of the citizens of the state of Grenada, and so we have to make sure that we don't just simply sit back and say to the consultant, do all the work. And even if the consultant presents a paper, we still have to do what is necessary to set it up. The legislation has to be passed. The operationalizing of it has to be passed. The PR work has to be done. That is part of what we're working on with the consultant on. But that ties in neatly to the whole question of things like a new hospital and so on. Because again, as part of the funding model for the hospital, you need to have insurance as well to ensure that particularly our average citizens can have access to the services and don't have to worry about how they're going to be paid for. So it may not necessarily be a case of the insurance will pay for everything, but there ought to certainly be some minimum services that you get from that, particularly services that we know are likely to be required by our citizens, and that's where the data and so on comes in, because what is prevalent in Grenada, whether it's stroke, whether it's ulcers, sores from diabetes, whatever the case might be, we have to be able to ensure that a sufficient wide enough basket of services are covered that will make it worthwhile for our citizens, but at the same time wouldn't bankrupt the system before we start. But that goes back also to the question of primary healthcare and preventative healthcare. I think I saw a quote where they said Steve Jobs said, as his life was coming to an end, that you should eat your food as if it's medicine, right? Because really and truly, to a large extent, the poison that we put inside of us is what creates a lot of the challenges that we have in terms of our lifestyle. And then on top of that, the lack of physical activity is also another major hurdle. So I think there has to be the education component and the behavioral change in terms of ensuring that we eat healthier, that we remain active active, particularly during our adult lives. We tend to be active as school children, and then as soon as we finish school, we pack up the mobility and we sit down. So I think those are two aspects that we really need to significantly invest in from an education perspective as well, to ensure that our citizens also do themselves a favor by not ever having to rely on national health insurance or minimizing the risk of them having to be in a clinic and a hospital, except for routine sort of basic checkups.
Okay, thank you very much. And viewers, Prime Minister introduced education, so we'll touch a little bit on education when we come back, but it is time for our first break.
I want to tell you something amazing.
I am Nexa. And when I say Nexa, I mean more than just another financial institution. We're a family. We're a community.
A community that listens and values your voice in every decision we make.
Big financial decisions can be daunting, but Nexa is a strong support system here to guide you every step of the way.
Nexa believes in empowerment, but you are never alone. We're with you wherever your road leads.
Whether it's owning my first home, educating my kids, or starting a business, Nexa is where I am following my dreams.
And here's the exciting part. You can be part of this incredible journey too. Just join today.
I am Nexa, and
you can be too.
We're making it even better to be a Nexa member. Ask a friend who's already a member to refer you. Our members refer someone, and both of you can enjoy special rewards. It's a win-win. Call us at 440-1354. Visit us on our social media or our website for how to join.
Nexa Credit Union, with you wherever your road leads.
Your new Grenlec bill is even easier to read and still has all the valuable information you need to track and manage your usage.
Hey Mom, okay, your friendly tech support is here. So you got the new Grenlec bill? Let's take a look. The new bill makes it even easier to see your bill total, the due date, and much more. And take a closer look. It actually is a lot easier to understand. Let me show you. You can still see exactly what the charges are for, but in a great new format, it even shows how the cost of generating and delivering the electricity to you is calculated using your actual usage. And Mom, let Lucy know she can check out Grenlec's new Understanding Your Bill video. Anyway, look who says hi, and see you soon.
Your new Grenlec bill, easier to understand and easier to track your usage.
Do you have muscular pain that no one can find a solution for? Are you tired of taking meds for joints and other pains? Hills and Valley Medicare Center on Grenville Street, St. George is here to help you heal. We will help you map a path to your full recovery. Visit us Monday to Saturday for a consultation with our on-site doctor, physiotherapist, and massage team. You will be glad you did. Our Medicare Center, a proud member of the Hills and Valley group of companies. On the hilltop or in the valley, we are with you wherever life takes you. Hills and Valley Pharmacy. Your health is our business.
Welcome back, viewers and listeners. We're speaking with Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell, and we're doing some reflecting on the 2023 accomplishments. We will get into some projections for 2024 and also look at our Golden Jubilee celebrations. Prime Minister, another 2023 quote. Our education and training models too are not tailored to suit our unique reality, the needs of our consumption patterns, nor our business sector. That was in your budget presentation 2023. What interventions occurred during the year that begin to address this reality?
Right. So I will start with the need to mainstream skills education in schools. And so we've started in the primary schools by recognizing that it has to be part of the mainstream. So we begun with pilots in some of the primary schools, and the idea is to roll that out in all of the primary schools. We must be able to expose our students to skills training across the board at all primary school level, and we need to be able to then follow that up within the secondary schools. So of course, and then the idea ultimately is to create centers of excellence. Now I want to make this point because I still think that there's this suggestion that you do skills training because you're not bright. And that is a fundamental mistake. In fact, it is because you're bright. In my view, you should be doing skills training, because the reality is the world, especially with the use of technology, you don't need basic skills training. You need to be able to marry technology, problem solving, and creativity with the skills training. Right? So the recognition is there is a dire shortage of skilled persons across all fields in Grenada. But we can't wait till people are in secondary school, or until they drop out of school, or until we've drilled into them that somehow academically they're not bright and so they have no value, and then expect them to somehow gladly take up skills training because their psyche is already damaged. Right. So the starting point, and the Minister of Education and his team have been working on this, is we start at the primary school level, and then we have agreed to do some consulting, because we recognize this is not something that you can just simply sit in the confines of the Ministry of Education or in cabinet and come up with the solutions to. We'll have to have extensive engagement with the business community in particular, and particularly those sectors where the need for the skills training are immediate, so that we can work with them. We've also we will also be partnering with Lotto and Dowe in particular, to initially have 3 centers of excellence to address skills training, but not just skills training, soft skills as well. Because the surveys are showing that when you ask employers what are some of the challenges they have with employees, it starts with things like punctuality. And right there, you're running into trouble.
You actually have to learn how to wake up in the morning and go to work every day.
Right, and be on time.
Right.
Right. Attitude. Customer service, those sort of issues. So it is not just a question of the pure technical skill. You could be an excellent carpenter, but if you should know to work an hour and a half after the start of work, then you're already in trouble. You're likely to lose the job. You have discipline issues. If someone walks in and you don't greet the customer, and you're not kind and pleasant to them, they're not coming back, and the business is impacted. So we recognize that Dowe in particular, for instance, has a program that is mainstream, that addresses this issue. Values, behavioral skills, and I think they're particularly good at it because certainly their history initially was treating with persons who were viewed as underprivileged or dropouts or etc., or troubled or what have you. And I think that they've shown over the years that focusing on human development first, on soft skills, is just as critical as the pure technical skills. So there's also that component, and the pilot for the 3 centers of excellence funded by Lottery in collaboration with Dowe and the Ministry of Education will look to start addressing some of those issues.
Where would these centers be? Would it be within communities or within schools?
It's likely to be within communities. Okay. Right? Because there are a couple of things that I think some of the research is showing. Up until we introduced the fact that everybody is going to secondary school, not you see some going and then they don't pass the exam and then you keep them back. There are lots of boys in particular who drop out of school between primary and secondary school, and nobody hears from them. And oftentimes they become the troublemakers. They become the ones likely to end up in criminal activity because they have nothing to do. Right? And so we need to capture all of those boys in particular who between 11, 12, 13 sort of go into no man's land, and make sure we give them a second chance and give them an opportunity. And even those who are going to secondary school, who may need the remedial classes and so on, it also means they probably need soft skills and so on. So we also need to capture them and make sure that we can provide them with the opportunities that they need. So I should point out, even Dowe, for example, has already indicated that with the free tuition policy, their numbers have increased significantly already, to the point where they've had to retain extra staff, as much as 3-4, to begin the teaching process, which obviously means we have to provide further assistance to help, because that's so I think in a short space of time, we're already beginning to see the fruits of some of the policies that we've taken. But we recognize, and that's why, for instance, we need to move the age to 18. Right. right? Because we recognize, again, between 16 and 18, even if you leave secondary school, as we say, you're not an adult, and if you're not absorbed into new law or TAMCC, there's really no other place to absorb you, right? And we can't, we have to ensure that between 16 and 18, the opportunities, if you didn't get it before, especially since our education system was not tailored to that, going forward, we need to give you the opportunities to be exposed to the skills training, to be trained in the soft skills, so that it makes you far more likely to be ready and prepared for the world of work, to be receptive to further training that you receive at the world of work. So those are some of the initiatives from a skills training perspective that we want to address. We certainly, particularly the construction sector, is a sector that we want to spend significant time engaging with the persons in those sectors. Some of them have suggested to us we need a construction school, a school that basically teaches construction methodologies, modalities, the new and modern techniques that you have. Because as you can see with a lot of the expansion of the construction that is taking place, the technology is also changing rapidly. The types of materials that are used, the building techniques, and there's significant demand, for example, for homes in Grenada. And if we're going to meet that demand, then the construction techniques must be ramped up in order to be able to deliver homes in a shorter, quicker time, and therefore it means we need more people who are trained in those type of technologies to be able to address that. So again, these are things that won't happen immediately, but they need to ensure that we begin laying the foundations, as I said, from primary school, so that students are exposed, so they don't think it's an afterthought, and they recognize that these are careers that they can pursue. But also we recognize that there are short-term skill sets that we can teach, and we're going to roll some of those things out. We can start with heavy equipment, for instance. There's a shortage of heavy equipment operators throughout Grenada, and everyone tells you that. So we intend, through MIT, to work with some of the operators and so on, so that we can actually have classes, intense short-term classes that can give people the skill set to operate these kinds of equipment that can have them certified.
Counterpart to that, if I may, would be legislation. So I know you spoke of this before. When will we see legislation lowering the age for these heavy equipment operators? And when will we see legislation in place mandating the school enrollment through 18?
Right, so the school enrollment through 18, that legislation is going to come on and be laid before Parliament in the first quarter of 2024. We also expect to address the issue with operators and so on in the first quarter of 2024. Okay. If you look at the budget presentation, those are very specific measures and policy announcements that we made. So we've already begun looking at what we need to do from a legislative point of view to address those issues. And it's important because I think there's a cultural shift that has to take place in Grenada. A lot of what maybe comes from the idea of privilege. A lot of what is, and from the fact that perhaps our society was founded based on colonialism and classism and those kinds of things, where what is routine skills is seen as a privilege. Right? Driving is not a privilege, it's a skill that you learn. And frankly, we should be encouraging every Grenadian to be able to drive. Whether or not you choose to drive is another matter. So it's not some privilege that only a few should aim to aspire to. It's frankly, it's almost like speaking to me. It's a right. It's a skill that we should encourage people to have. And so the ability to operate things like heavy equipment and so on, we should be encouraging people to learn to do those things for sometimes obvious reasons that we fail to appreciate. We are prone to natural disasters, emergencies, etc. When we have these things, if you only have a handful of people who could operate a backhoe or a tractor or whatever, it basically means you have people who are landlocked or cut off, and you're waiting for somebody who will come and operate a machine to help you. But if you have more and more persons who have that skill set, then we don't have to worry. Once there's a disaster, we could rest assured we have the competencies within our villages, so people can quickly jump on a backhoe or this or that, clear the road, move, etc., etc. That's just one example of why these things have to be demystified. And frankly, we have to encourage as many of us to be able to operate and get those kinds of skill sets. And all it requires is practice, hand-eye coordination, some patience and some discipline. So these are some of the things that we have to remove, and we're hoping that our partners and stakeholders, insurance companies and so on, understand why. Because they will drive economic activity. Right? And it also will address one of the issues that we need to address in things like construction, which is more women in the field. Right? So things like heavy equipment operating and so on, there's nothing unique or special about it that a man should do that a woman can't do. It's driving. For all intents and purposes, specialized equipment. Right? And if we have those classes that can address some of those things, then it means more and more women can get into the field. And obviously it helps to address the work imbalance that we still have, where more and more women are still unemployed as compared to men. So some of those very short-term specific issues we intend to push heavily on, because we recognize, one, it's an opportunity for immediate employment. It's an opportunity opportunity to fill the underemployment in some of those areas where employers are struggling to find operators for heavy equipment. And we have significant construction that is ongoing and will continue. And so we need to make sure that we can fill those positions and not have the employers have to import machine operators from outside of Grenada just to do movement and that sort of thing.
Okay. In your conversations, I have not heard anything specific for cruise and yachting. And as you address that particular industry, just expand on tourism in general.
Right. So we've had some initial discussions with the Grenada Marine Yachting. I was trying to remember the acronym.
The MEAG or something.
MEAG, but I didn't want to say MWAG. And then I misspeak. So we've had some discussions with them, and I think we recognize that it's an area that we have to give very deliberate thought to, because just simple things like teaching our citizens to sail is a starting point. Outside of places like the Yacht Club and Woburn and Guave, where members of the community and so on just teach that. These are things that have to become more commonplace and more widespread. So we do recognize there's a shortage of welders, underwater welders, machinists, captains for boats, those kinds of things. So we've had some initial policy discussions on those, but I will accept that we have not gotten to the point where we have specific policy initiatives or programs to address it. Now, part of it obviously comes from the fact that the HR component, because we then have to find persons who have that skill set and who can help us in delivering on some of the policy and training. The one area that we've spent some time on making sure we can preserve and pass on is the boat building, particularly boat building tradition in Carriacou. So we've allocated funding for that so that we can teach more of that in a very deliberate and systematic way, and we can introduce it into our schools. So at least that tradition is passed on. But in terms of the marine yachting sector, it's an area that we still need to give some significant focus on. We're hoping we can work with our boat yards and so on to begin to at least identify what are the low-hanging fruits where we can have short-term courses to train people in some of those specific areas.
Okay. Let's just go a little bit in terms of training now, agriculture. Any investment in training to develop the human resources capacity within the agriculture sector?
Well, the answer is yes, and we need to do a lot more of it. In 2023, we had, for example, the Youth in Agriculture program, which we launched. But I think I will certainly say we are not satisfied by a long shot with what we need to do to address agriculture. Things like agricultural science is optional in schools, and I think that's a mistake. Because essentially, as a small island, if you can't feed yourself, once there's some external problem, we're going to be in trouble. And I think COVID, in a very, very clear way, exposed that. But it also showed that we understood immediately that we needed to turn to the soil, turn to our oceans, and we were able to be resilient. But we can't forget those lessons and then go back to the same pattern of behavior. But I think it has to come from our education system, right? We were an agricultural society. Agricultural science was taught. It was something, in my view, that was valued and respected. And you had agronomists. You had, people grew up understanding that. Up to today, I was saying in cabinet that Mike Noel, the banana man, it stuck in my head at 6 a.m. It was Mike Noel, the banana man, and I think BBC News, right? So we have to invest a lot more. In the science, in exposing our students, again, at a very early age, in my view, it should be mandatory, and the investment in technology that enhances how we view farming and food security. So that is one area that we have to do significantly a lot more work in. But I do think the opportunities there. I certainly think young people are interested in agriculture. The government has some significant estates that they can begin to look to put significantly more resources in. They were more or less in abeyance, underserved, under-resourced. The Minister of Agriculture, who is an economist, has his hands full, because that is an area I would certainly say, if I had to give us some grading, we are certainly not satisfied with what we need to address there. But I think, as I said, that young people are interested in it. I think COVID would have shown them the value of it, but not just agriculture, agro-processing as well.
Well, that's where I was going to go next in terms of the secondary products and what type of investment can we anticipate seeing in 2024 to encourage, whether it's private or PPPs for it. Right.
So I think two areas. One, we will certainly be incentivizing the private sector to get a lot more into agro-processing. I hope I'm permitted to say that, but a Grenadian has taken steps to acquire the juice processing plant in Lasajas. So we certainly will be quite keen to work with him to get this up and going again, because everyone complains about the wastage of our fruit on island. There are a number of Grenadians who are engaged in significant agro processing, from the making of teas to honey, to honey-related products and so on. So and a lot of them are small, micro-sized businesses, which is where a lot of our CES funding deliberately targeted. We've also been working on recognizing it's not just the funding, but it's things like the marketing, the labeling, helping them find markets outside of Grenada. All of that sort of support between GIDC, GDB, and a number of other government departments. We are working with them. You'd certainly see, for example, at Independence, a massive all things Grenada, made in Grenada, to start encouraging that. But again, it's just the beginning. I think there are areas like the nutmeg industry. I've raised with GCN why are we still exporting or nutmegs, and not, in my view, converting all of it into agro-processing. Those are some of the bigger ideas that I'm keen to take on, because I certainly think that from a cash flow point of view, even if GCN itself didn't have the funding, a partnership with the government that allows it over a 1 or 2 year period to be able to buy all the nutmegs, keep them, because the one thing with manufacturing and agro-processing is supply. Right. When you start and someone books a 40 container of nutmegs that you've grind and packaged, you can't tell them when they order the first shipment and they say shipment number 2, we don't have enough supply.
Maybe 6 months,
etc. So we have to make sure that we have the raw materials, and if it means to some extent stockpiling it, so be it. That's what people do. They buy. I don't think people appreciate that. The people who sell you coffee didn't pick the coffee yesterday, right? That they're basically buying it in advance and stockpiling so that they can meet the demand. So those are some of the wider areas that I think we have to tackle as well. And we can talk about our chocolate.
Well, yes,
right?
certainly.
And the support that we need in those areas, and honey. So I really do think that more and more Grenadians accept that these are lucrative areas that we can get into, both domestically, regionally, and internationally. And so our policies, particularly from a small and micro enterprise,
but they would have to achieve economies of scale in order for them to be able to come to market.
They would, but I think also, not always are you mass marketing. I think sometimes when you're small, what you have to find is a niche that says to people you are giving them something unique, something special, something extra, and therefore you basically have to pay a lot more for it. So it's what I will call high-end niche type agro-processing that I think we need to engage in. The fact that it's pure, it's organic, it's handmade, it's not being manufactured in a place where they pay people slave labor wages and those kind of things. So all of that, a lot of this is marketing really, and the packaging, and telling the story, and we have the internet and so on that can do so. So I think that's where I think we have to help, right? Because we will never be able to compete with India or China, or much less even Jamaica in terms of scale, or Trinidad, where energy is cheap. So I think what we have to focus on is how do we brand our products and give the kind of quality that says you are going to pay a premium for it. Because what I'm giving you is special, it's in limited supply. When you get it, you will want more of it, but there's only so much that you can have. And people do that all the time.
Well, you sort of telling the story. So let me just switch to our heritage tourism. We saw in 2023 the start of the refurbishment of Fort George. And I'm assuming that this would be an addition to our tourism product focus on heritage tourism. But share a little bit in terms of our expectations of completion and what that end product would look like for Grenadians and for visitors.
Right. Well, I think, it's a complete restoration of the fort. Even before we get to the tourism part of it, I think the fact is it's a built heritage, and for our sake, first and foremost, this site is of enormous historical significance for the last several hundred years, for more reasons than one. So the need to preserve it and restore it, I think, is the first thing. So the idea ultimately is that it should be restored, it should be in pristine condition, and then we should be able to leverage it to create the kind of tourist-based economic activity that can be sustained on a long-term basis. And that's just one example. We have several of these forts. Right. We have several historical buildings. The entire St. George is a historical site, right? So we really have to have a renaissance of the tongue of St. George. There's no question about that. And that renaissance, in my view, will also drive our tourism and drive the economic activity. We have to ask ourselves, how do we see St. George? How I see St. George is a pedestrian-friendly, historic city that is pleasant to walk, that is fun to walk, and at the same time you get all of its history, right? So making it's going to take time. It's obviously a sort of a long-term vision that we have, but restoring Fort George, in a sense, is the beginning of the entire restoration that has to take place within St. George, as well as addressing the issues of environment and climate that we need to think about: storm drains, the potential rising sea tides, which is what the $100 million US dollar soft loan from the Saudi Development Fund is meant to address, part of which is meant to address places like the Carnage, and how we treat with the rising tide, how we treat with storm runoff.
How do we treat with the dilapidated buildings on our beautiful horseshoe harbor, the Carnage?
Well, again, that's where part policy but part pride also comes in, because I think obviously we're a democracy and it's private property, right? And we can only pass policies that can incentivize people to invest and to restore their properties. We simply don't have the fiscal space to say, you know what, we're going to acquire all these properties ourselves and renovate them ourselves. So we have to find the what we call public-private partnership models. And there are other places where it's been done. In Harlem, at one time it was run down, it's regentrified now. Liverpool, from the days of the coal mining and so on, they've been able to do it. So we've been working, we've looked at some of the models recommended by the World Bank, we've looked at, as I said, some of these areas. We also feel it's an opportunity to tap into the diaspora as well, and to create this sort of mixed use, where you probably have businesses on one level on the ground floor and people can reside upstairs and so on. But it requires a carefully curated policy, because one, it's private property for the most part, and we obviously don't want to take people's property, but we want to incentivize them. Two, to create a historic look, you're then going to have physical regulations that basically talks about how the restoration is done, what's the incentives for doing it, and then ultimately what use the properties can be put to. And we still don't have parking in town, so it means you have to encourage residential use. You have to encourage electric bikes, probably scooters, and frankly people walking, because it's healthier to walk, given how picturesque St. George's is. But that is a long-term project.
Would we lead with government buildings? And I'm thinking like the Marine Villa, where the Housing Authority was. I'm thinking of the facility that housed, I think it's BB's Crabback and others. Those are government facilities, and they're not the pretty sites.
The drill yard, the museum, the finance. No, absolutely, we have to, because that's what we have control over. So we're actually actively looking at the options of whether, using the model that permitted the rebuilding of the financial complex after the fire, whether we can vest all of these properties in the private sector for the explicit purpose of having them renovated, rebuilt, and government is in dire need of offices itself, and then certainly being the anchor tenant, so to speak, that would allow the private sector to recoup their investment. So that is, we currently doing the database of all these buildings, because believe it or not, we seem not to store things in central places that is easily accessible. So we're doing, in a sense, a complete audit of the buildings, their size, the state they're in, so that we can get to the point where we can present to Cabinet an option or options for how we go about at least starting with government buildings, the regentrification of them. So it's certainly an opportunity, I think, for the private sector in Grenada and in the diaspora to get involved by making proposals to the government for us to consider as to how we can perhaps vest the buildings in them, have them use it as collateral to raise the necessary financing to have it renovated, rebuilt, and then ultimately for us to then become the anchor tenants that allows them over time to recover their capital.
Okay. Let me just touch on a couple of structural things. One of my favorite topics, I don't know if it will be yours, MNIB. Yes. When will we see that new look MNIB, and what can we anticipate?
Right. Well, you must be clairvoyant, because as luck would have it, I just received the two consultants' report about an hour before coming into studio here. I haven't had the chance to read it. The technical working group is going to be reviewing the consultants' report and then make the final recommendations to Cabinet. So I have not had the chance to review the report as well, but I expect once we get that, we will obviously disclose to the public what the recommendations are from the consultant and how we intend to move forward. So I think I'm on point to say first quarter of 2024. Certainly there should be a clear roadmap as to where we go. I have kind of said to our team that I'm very keen to make sure that the roadmap is sort of implemented by second quarter of 2024, worst case scenario, third quarter of 2024. But we certainly, I think we are almost there in terms of the recommended roadmap.
There was a conversation in Budget 2024 of a merger of sorts between GDB and GIDC GIDC?
Yes.
Philosophically, just share what's the thinking.
Well, the starting point, one, is that we're splitting thin resources we don't have. And I'll give you a prime example. The current manager of GDB came from GIDC. He was the investment promotion manager. And he moved from one institution to the next. We didn't have to fill the gap. And GDB, it's Grenada's Development Bank. So the question is, this bank has to be impactful. Right. So let's talk about the healthcare industry, for example. In its current state, what can it do to help the transformation process in the health sector? Nothing. Right? Because it's sort of been reduced to, I don't know, vehicle loans, small little business loans, etc., etc. So we have to reimagine what GDB is. What is GIDC? It is meant to promote investment into Grenada. Where do we need the investment? In the healthcare sector. Right? So neither of these institutions actually solving the functions. And then on top of that, we're splitting resources between the two of them. They're competing with each other, so to speak, just to retain staff and talent. So I think we have to get to the point where we recognize that we're small. We don't need to duplicate resources. We don't need to waste resources. Right? We need to consolidate. I'll give you an example. GDB, to a large extent, has no asset base. GIDC has some of the prime industrial commercial lands in Grenada, and it is just sitting there. It rents it, but that's it. It doesn't leverage or use the lands at all. You combine that, you immediately, whatever you call the institution, when you combine it, it gives, from a banking perspective, significant assets that you can use yourself to raise significant capital to help. It allows, in a sense, the merger of your lending policy with your actual investment and fiscal policy, right? And then it allows that institution, in my view, to focus on what we truly believe in 10, 15 years from now will transform Grenada. We have to be clear about something. You are not going to become, I wouldn't even say wealthy. You're not even going to become averagely successful if you're doing the same thing that everybody's doing now, 15 years from now. So as a country, we are not going to have transformation if we continue running this country exactly as we're running it now. If we do not create new industries, new areas for business, new areas for opportunities, we will not create new wealth. It's as simple as that. So when I talk about the health industry, I'm not just talking about how we address in a piecemeal fashion the challenge we face here. We have to be able to make Grenada a place where people come because of the healthcare. Right? So it basically means you have to create a fiscal regime and an investment climate that makes people want to come and invest in here simply because of what we're doing in healthcare. And in a sense, the hospital is just a part of that ecosystem. So that means GDB, GIDC, the personnel there, that's what they should be tasking themselves with. How do we create the fiscal incentives? How do we get the capital into Grenada that allows us to target the healthcare sector? Actually, it shouldn't be my job to spend my time on that. But the problem is, with their current focus, it really is impactful, and it's no criticism of the people who work there. I'm saying the criticism...
But it would also be a criticism of our policymakers.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's no criticism of the people who work in GDB or GIDC. It's a criticism of the policymakers. And I'm saying we are in a position to change that. So if we don't change it, and next year I'm sitting here and you're having the conversation with me and you say, where are we going, then I would deserve the flag. So the truth is, we have to go, and we have to go quickly. Right? They are simple institutions, to be honest. They're not that complex. They don't have massive staff. And if we don't take the bull by the horn, then we'll continue pussyfooting, and not actually make the kind of progress we need. And I'm raising this because I'm saying, for countries who are able to leapfrog economically, it's because of bold decisions. It's because of risk. There will be no reward without risk. We have to take some risk. We can't continue with the conservative approach. And I'm saying, let's be honest. We have significant challenges as small islands, energy costs, etc., etc. But if we continue with a very conservative 1% economic growth this year, 2% economic growth this year, every year something could reverse that. Right. A hurricane, war, pandemic, etc. So the likelihood of being in this vicious average poverty trap is going to remain. So there has to be an opportunity where, if we're talking what will Grenada be like for the next 50 years, you have to engage in something that is transformative. When you start it may not appear that way, right? I'm sure when SGU came, people probably thought, okay, well, maybe Uncle and whoever this gentleman is, Mr. Monica, that say they're doing an offshore medical school, probably might have laughed him with the tongue and say, what's wrong with these two crazy men? But sometimes you need the crazies around in order to be able to deliver on something 30, 40 years. So that's how I feel about healthcare. that it's an opportunity, since everybody wants to live for everybody. Everybody wants to look young. Everybody wants to live forever. That's where the money is. And I think that's why we have to really ensure that we take steps now to create the kind of industry and make sure our institutions are focused on that. And then we can talk about other things, technology, right? So the truth is, we're not going to create wealth if we don't take some, in my view, pretty radical and significant policies that will address economic development, not in the traditional same kind of approach that we've taken.
Okay. It seems to be time for a second break, viewers. So we will take the second break and we will come back. Prime Minister did introduce the next 50 years, so we'd have to talk something about the Golden Jubilee and independence.
Yes, we have rebranded and we are now called Bee's Crispy Chicken, serving you with authentic, well-seasoned fried chicken using our own secret recipe. Unlike Tom Jones and Uncle Sam, we use a blend of local herbs and spices to give you, our valued customers, delicious fried and grilled chicken at affordable prices. Our menu includes chicken and chips, wraps, salads, hamburgers, chicken burgers, fried and grilled fish, your favorite ice cream flavors, and much, much more. You can find us at XL Plaza Grand Anse and our 2 express outlets at Granby Street, St. George's and Jubilee Street, St. Andrew. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Order online via Yogo or call 403-8003 to order in advance. Bee's Crispy Chicken. For us, by us.
On Caribbean Passport, join us for Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. Witness the spectacle of the mass, the music, and the energy. Then we'll sprint over to Barbados for the Run Barbados Marathon. It's color, revelry, and tons of excitement on Caribbean Passport, right here on this station.
Welcome back, viewers and listeners, and we're speaking to Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell. Just before we get on to independence, you are the Minister of Infrastructure, and I do have, so this one is a personal question. In 2024, will we see lights at the cricket stadium?
The answer is no, not in 2024. We are refurbishing the stadium. In fact, the cricket stadium, specifically, the refurbishment has been delayed through the cooperation and kind gesture of the Chinese embassy and the government of China. Funding was secured for the renovation of the stadium. That actually should have started in August, but you know what happens in August? There was Carnival. And then we have the independence celebration 50th anniversary. So again, a request was made to delay the work to accommodate the hosting of the event. And that's the challenge you face, because, you know, we want improvement, we want development, but sometimes we don't want to make the sacrifices. So the work will really begin in earnest after the 50th anniversary of independence activities at the stadium. The work is estimated to take about 18 months because it's significant renovation. If you look at the roof structures, you would see this is heavy stuff that has to be taken down and redone. So during that 18-month process, the idea is that we will then collaborate to have the lights installed during that construction period, so that when the renovation is completed, you then have lights as well. So really there will be no activities after February at the cricket stadium for approximately 18 months in order for us to get the stadium up to where we need it to be and to get the lights installed at the same time. I would just say we are currently also redoing the track at the Kirani James Stadium. So the preliminary works, I think the team is arriving here on Wednesday, and so we expect work to begin in earnest in the following week and so on. And obviously we need to get the track ready and installed in time for the active
Will it be for Intercall, or are we looking at Easter for Carifta?
We are certainly, the goal is Easter for Carifta. We believe, and I'm subject to guidance, subject to correction, based on my last briefing, that if we're going to have any event at all, it will only be Intercall. We don't foresee that we'll be able to host any, because there's a certain time period that has to pass passed before the track can be used. But I can always sort of get the exact timelines on this. But the aim is certainly to have it ready for carriage start.
Okay.
I mean, if we can test it within the call, that would be perfect.
Okay, and we want to have home field advantage.
Absolutely.
Right. Let me ask you, Minister of Infrastructure Molyneux.
Yes. No, we're proceeding. The piling and so on has been done. In a nutshell, it's
what brought us here? Did we receive inappropriate advice from the experts initially that the resolution that was proposed, which has failed, was incorrect?
Well, I can't say that because, first of all, I'm not an expert, right? And it's a situation we met. So Beston designed a solution. Now, there's design, and then obviously someone has to build. Right? So my understanding is that the initial design did not contemplate any interference with the what I would call topside rock surface, right? And in fairness to them, the slippage never occurred from the top side. It was from the bottom. If you recall, there were houses and so on there that basically the land started slipping from beneath the road, and then eventually the road itself began collapsing. So their design basically was, initial design was meant to address the road on the bottom side and not the top side. My understanding is when the construction started, there was a Nawasa pipe which laid there. That pipe broke, and a lot of water came down. Now, I don't think the water affected the top side. But however, it seems as if because there was so much water and so on, that a decision was taken from within the Ministry for Infrastructure that we should do something about the top side. And as a result, significant earth, as you can see, was excavated from the top side and dumped on the bottom side. And during that excavation, obviously, it's quite clear, even though the site is small, that the type of material you have actually varies considerably within that small space. And you could have seen it. When we went there, we stood there and you could literally see loose gravel coming down. So that obviously created a further problem, because if the design was never meant to address the top side, and you know of a situation where the top side is coming down, obviously you have to redesign. And so basically that is what happened. You then had to redesign to deal with the original situation, which is the slippage from the bottom, a new road, and to now deal with the top side, which obviously needed to be stabilized, because if it's not stabilized, even if you have a road, then obviously gravel is coming down. So that has been done. The design is really, I would call it a Roman arch, and it includes a significant wall, so that if you have slides coming down, it will hit the wall, flow beneath the road. There are archways so that any debris will then come beneath that archway. So that is what has been designed. The piling has occurred, and so they should be moving to the next stage of the construction. The design envisages, when it's finished, that you'd have, for example, a sidewalk on the external area that you can walk, and perhaps potentially even some sort of cantilever that you can sit and look over to. So we expect the road to be finished, all things equal, certainly by, if not the third quarter, well, let's put it this way, barring any major change in the physical state of the site, I am not prepared to accept that this road isn't going to be built by the end of 2024.
Okay.
Right? The commitment we have is that by the third quarter of 2024, it should be finished, but I appreciate in construction, there could always be delays, sometimes outside of the control of the contractor. But certainly we expect the road, it's a short area, to be finished by 2024. And there's been piling that has taken place, and there appears not to have been any significant rockfall and so on. So we believe that's evidence that the site has stabilized. Hopefully we're going into the dry season and there isn't too much rain to further address the top side.
Minister of Transportation, we hear Liat is folding again ending of the month, and I know you have been quite vocal on regional airlift.
Yes.
What do you propose as a resolution?
No, we've been having extensive discussions at the OECS level on this issue. The heads themselves, whether or not they're responsible for transport in the department, in the islands, have been leading this initiative, and to some extent even I have been spending a lot of time. But we can't give ourselves advice, right? As a lawyer, they usually say if you have yourself as a client, you're a fool. And this is one area where it is quite clear that not just yet, but all around the world, airlines fail all the time. And so we have to get some expert advice. And so we've been speaking to a lot of the experts on what is the best course of action that is required. We've received proposals from business persons and aviation business people from within the region. I know it's going to be hard. But I certainly expect that in 2024, the OECS at least should be in a position to say to the public, this is the sums we are investing, whether it's an existing airline or whether it's a complete startup, and this is where we intend to invest the money, and these are the people that we would work with to bring some connectivity, certainly between Grenada in the south and hopefully Antigua BVI in the north.
Okay. One people, one journey, one future. Yes. The theme for the celebration of the Golden Jubilee seems to be forward-thinking, as opposed to reflective quite often when we're celebrating independence. Is this a correct interpretation?
Yes. I mean, there's some element of reflection because you have to talk about the journey. How did you get here? But, you know, I always say, for example, that, you know, death is for the living. When you go to a funeral and you go to celebrate the life of someone who's sitting there, that person's life is over. So why are you going to the funeral? It's really an opportunity for you to reflect on their life, on your life, and to think about your life, the rest of it, and what will you do? And in a sense, I think when you come on a landmark celebrations like our independence, 50th anniversary, we certainly can celebrate all of the successes. We can certainly reflect and learn from the challenges, the mistakes, the areas for growth. But crucially, it's about the next 50 years.
Okay.
You know,
and what would you say the public can look to, either in the 2024 budget or in the philosophy of your government that is futuristic in that vein as we speak to the next 50 years?
Right, so one of the events that is carded for the celebrations is Vision 75. Mm-hmm. Right, so it is really a conversation, a talk. You know, you have these things, the TED Talks and so on. A conversation with the public about what country do we envisage 25 years from now. Hopefully I'm alive, mm-hmm. Right? But even if I'm not, you know, I think we have to have that conversation because I think we have perhaps not done sufficient of that, which means the planning, right? And not just the planning by politicians in a room, but the country itself. And that's why I talk so much about healthcare. We have to imagine what society we want to live in. And to do so, you have to talk about what standards, what values we have, and to make sure that we don't let things just simply happen or deteriorate. And I'll give a good example. Let's take something like roadside vending, mm-hmm. Right? People may say it's not a popular political topic, but I'm prepared to talk about it. Do we want a society where we just simply say every and anybody could just set up a shack on the side of the road, set up a bucket, set up a tent, and sell whatever they have? That's a question we have to answer, not me. We have to answer that question. And if we have sufficient consensus, the consensus maybe we want it, you know, mm-hmm. That it's okay. We should all set up stuff on the side of the road and sell. Then if that's the consensus, well, we know that's the country we'll have 75 years from now. If the consensus is no, that's not what we want. Then
as with businesses without any parking, so right. Roadside businesses with no parking.
Right. Then we will obviously say, no, that's not what we want, and we will then act, both in terms of policy, in terms of people we elect into office, in terms of holding them accountable, in terms of talking to our fellow brothers and sisters and say, that's not the way, you know, we need to create a more planned type of society. And that really, I think, is the crux of whether we will create wealth or not, because wealth doesn't happen by accident. Mm-hmm. Success isn't going to happen by accident. It has to be planned. You have to work at it. You have to have discipline. You have to become a disciplined, hard-working, yes, fun-loving, nice people, but we have to work hard, right? So the truth is, if we talk about what sort of future we want, what is the future? What is the future the education system should create, right? What is the future the criminal justice system should create? Should we continue with a population of 300-400 people in prisons, or should we be setting the target to say our prison population should be no more than 150, no more than 100, and then explain why? Because, for example, we're criminalizing a lot of behavior that perhaps could simply be talked through, right? And so men argue, they chop one another, they don't have the skill set to do soft skills, to talk, to negotiate out the differences, right. Etc. Mm-hmm. So it covers a wide area. We could talk about, you talked about transport and the congestion on the roads. Mm-hmm. If we continue importing vehicles as we're importing in Grenada at the rate we're going, unabated, with no policy, no legislation, in 3 years, it will be easier to walk from town to Grandlands than it is to drive. It's already easier to probably walk from town to Grandlands because of the sheer amount of traffic. So we can either sit by and say, we do nothing about this, we don't have the conversation, we say no. We may have to get like some of the islands in the north where we say, you simply cannot import more vehicles. Or you have to have justification for it. Now, people may say, again, people love their vehicles. If you talk about those things, you'll be voted out of office. Well, that's fine. But But I'm saying we have to say, okay, when you vote me out of office and you allow it, you will pay the consequences for it, because we'll have gridlock, no productivity, you can't get anywhere, accidents, etc., etc., etc. And these things are not far-fetched. It's quite easy to happen. You could just go online and see countries where you literally sit in traffic for hours, right? Regardless of the size of the country. And so those are the things we have to start talking about. What kind of Grenada we want 25 years from now. To me, that is more important than even reflecting and celebrating our past 50 years, because we're a very young nation. And I think we have an opportunity, perhaps even more so than prior leaders, with technology, with the internet, to really actually plan out the society and work towards it. And I think that is the test of our time.
In terms of the celebration, I've heard the comment that when we look at the schedule of activities, there's nothing innovative or transformative about it. It's more or less the same old, same old. How do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, that's probably a subjective opinion. So have we ever had a 50 or 49 or 40 or 47 commemorative EC dollar note distinct to Grenada and distinct to the features of Grenada? I don't think so. Have we ever had an upper pop concert that basically speaks to all local artists coming together and having a national event that celebrates that? I don't think so. When you come to the military parade, you would appreciate that it's a one-of-a-kind military parade. So there are certain things, it is an independence celebration, so there are certain things that inevitably will be very distinctive of a military parade. You can't have a military parade without a military parade. But there are features to it that will happen. We've got a gospel concert. We've got an art and historic concert that's talking about. We've talked about Vision 2025. I mean, I actually think there might be too many activities, frankly. So we have to appreciate that there are legacy issues that we are treating with. Part of it clearly is a celebration. You have to appreciate it. But I think the more fundamental issue here is the question of the next 25 years and what are the things we are going to treat with that addresses that. Now remember, there was a lot of controversy over it, but October 19th, in a sense, was part of that entire understanding of our history, who we are, and how that relates to independence. Has there been a National Heroes Park before? No. So we're taking the kind of steps to do. Independence might be a moment when you celebrate it, but independence is lived. And it's lived through the fact that we have the freedom, the sovereignty to make decisions. And that really is how you see the transformation. What decisions are we going to make in 2024? Reflecting on our past, reflecting on our journey, reflecting on who we are as a people that will transform us in the next 25 years.
The other comment that I just want you to respond to, as we look at the lights, and I don't know what the budget for the launch was, but we've seen some extension of the initial lights that were put down. It was observed that in 2023, now in 2024, with the additionals, it's powered by electricity and not solar. Grenada, as a lead of small island development states in climate change, one would have imagined that if we're going to light up the carnage, it would be solar and not powered by the monies of the people of Grenada.
And that's a fair question, but solar has a cost. Don't let people, we have to be disciplined with our language. The sun is free, but solar isn't free, right? Someone has to pay for the solar panels. And if you have rain or if you have cloud cover, you need battery storage in order to get the solar. So there's no such thing as free energy. All right, there might be a free resource that you don't have to pay for, but to harness that resource and then to convert it into something that's useful, you still have to get the investment to do it. But the point is taken, and I certainly wish that it could have been powered by solar, but I will preempt perhaps the wider discussion that you may go in, which is our energy mix and where we go from here. And that, Colin, is a very real issue that as a country we're going to have to grapple with. In fact, tomorrow morning, the PRC and Grenlec is meeting. And I'm meeting with them to address this very issue. So,
is the PERC reconstituted now fully?
Yes, the PERC is reconstituted. Mr. Asif Jassat is the chairman, and the PERC has retained Mr. Andrew Millett, who will be as the chief executive officer. Right, and we have to appreciate it. PERC has to be built out. Right, it existed to a large extent on paper with minimal staff, and we still are yet to fill some of the critical technical roles. So in a sense, PERC is new as a regulator of energy. It is still a relatively new area. But I just want to give some context, because I certainly personally wish Grenada was 100% renewable. But I think I have to listen to the engineers and the technical people who will all say renewable energy is intermittent, including wind, including solar. The technology has improved significantly, but we are not, and there is no country I'm aware of in the world that operates 100% on renewable, or even 80 or even 70% on renewable. You still have, in a sense, complete reliance on fossil fuel for what I think they call, base or firm energy. And that's a reality we have to grapple with. The question, though, is how do we wean ourselves as much as possible without compromising reliability from the fossil fuels and into renewables?
Are we in 2024 going to explore our own fossil fuel potential, in order to have that base for ourselves as opposed to importing?
Yes. I mean, a technical working group has been appointed by Cabinet. It is doing a lot of work. It is led by a former Minister for Finance, Mr. Nazim Book, and has a number of distinguished Grenadians, including Mr. Rodney George, Mr. Richard Duncan, the Solicitor General is part of the team to get a comprehensive historical basis of what has been done, where we are, and what we need to do in order to address the exploration and development of our hydrocarbons. Now, you may face a moral dilemma because people may say, well, wait, you're a small island, you're impacted by climate change is caused by fossil fuels, etc., and you are actually trying to pursue the development and exploration of fossil fuels. And how do you reconcile that with the whole question of climate change, etc.? And my simple response to that is, how have all of the other countries in the world reconciled that? Right? They've used the fossil fuels and the wealth it generates to transform the economies, and after they do that, then they transition into renewable energy. So whether it's China, whether it's the United States, whether it's all of the oil-producing countries in the Gulf and in the Middle East, they are not going to say, let's remain poor and try and deal with renewables. They've all exploited the fossil fuels to grow their own economies, to create the wealth, to create the technology that allows them now to look at the alternative, which is how do we then wean ourselves off fossil fuels. So I'm saying, as a small island with 110, 120,000 people, if we get the opportunity and if there's significant commercial hydrocarbons, I think me or any other leader of Grenada owes it to Grenadians, first of all, to come and say that is a moral dilemma. Let's say your consensus, but I don't think Grenadians will tell me stay poor and let's try and harness our renewable energy and we remain poor. But there may be options, which is the wealthy guys, if they want us to keep it in the ground, will then have to pay us the equivalent of the money it will generate in fossil fuels so that we can then develop the economy, and we'd be happy to do that, in which case there's no moral dilemma because we'll be contributing to reducing emissions while at the same time relying on renewable energy, if people are prepared to trade and pay us for doing so.
Okay. It's time for us to close. So by way of closing comments, I don't know if you want to give us a sneak peek of your own vision of 2075. You've done a lot in terms of the visioning, but when that speech or presentation is made, a couple of things that probably might be top of mind that you would like to challenge Grenadians as we look towards 2075, and then any other thing you want to add as closing comments.
Right. So I will start off by saying we hope that the Vision 75 will be twinned with the launch of the $50th note. So we're working with the central bank for that to happen. So the first part of the program we anticipate will be the launch of the $50 note, as in displaying it to the public so they see what it looks like. The notes themselves will be available later in the year. As a legal tender note, you can spend it, and I want to take the opportunity to re-emphasize that because we've had some mischief makers who are suggesting otherwise.
People want to hold it.
Yes, the note is legal tender. You can spend it, or you can keep it as a keepsake, right? We're still working on the modalities as to cost and so on with the central bank, but it is legal tender as well as it's a commemorative note, and obviously you can keep it because there will be a finite number in circulation. So we hope to twin that with Vision 75. I would say here that when you see the note, there will be certain things that are obvious about the note compared with the average EC note. And that also may give some hint into what I hope from a governance perspective 75 years from now, at least the state or the type of governance system that Grenada, in my view, ought to have. And I've talked, I think if you were at the Bar Association lecture, you would have seen that I talked about the fact that from a governance perspective, we need to have a government that is reflective of us, that is nimble, that doesn't waste resources on ceremonial things, but pays more attention to functionality and effectiveness. So I think that's one area that I hope in 75 years we would have tackled or addressed our governance system. But I think who we are as a people, what sort of people we want to be, I think is going to be critical. And I think as a country, oftentimes, Americans talk about American values and those kinds of things. What are Grenadian values? Right? Do we believe in handouts or hand-ups? Do we genuinely believe that no matter where you're from, no matter the circumstances in which you came into the world, that with education, that with being given an opportunity, you will make it, and that it's our collective responsibility to create those opportunities for everybody, right? Do we believe that we're part of the world, and so speaking English shouldn't make you arrogant and you don't learn another language, right? And it's more like an elective, but that in school we say, listen, we live in a part of the world where we're in the minority. The language we speak is in the minority, and therefore you need to be able to converse with the majority, and that then opens up an entire new world for you, because if you can't speak the language, then you simply can't learn about them, you can't learn the culture, you can't learn the opportunities that are available to you. Do we accept that the fourth industrial revolution, the technology era, is not going back? It is going forward at lightning speed, and therefore at education foundation, right? Technology is almost like a language, and therefore every child has to be given the opportunity early o'clock to be exposed to it and to be able to create it as well, because all we're doing is consuming. And if we accept that, then how do we start revamping our education system to treat with that? Right? So if we are producing hundreds of young people who feel disillusioned, who feel disconnected, who feel the possibility of them ever being, I don't even want to use the word wealthy, having a decent standard of life is not possible in Grenada. And we seek not to do anything about it from an education perspective, because all successful societies are knowledge-based. I'm not discounting our spirituality, but even the most spiritual countries, even those that are run as theocracies, when they become successful because they're knowledge-based. And you can take all of the Gulf countries. Some of them are run as theocracies, but it is knowledge they exploit to make them wealthy, right? So even if it's one resource, they have oil, you still have to have the knowledge about the oil, you still have to understand the oil markets, and then you still have to manage your money and invest it in such a way to make the country wealthy, right? So if we do not pursue knowledge and new knowledge as a basis for building our small societies, the societies will fail.
Okay.
Right, and I think that is what I would say is the emphasis we need for Vision 75. It is knowledge-based societies that succeed, combined with your values, aka your spirituality. And if we don't talk that openly to people, the idea that you just simply get up and wade through life and hope the government will somehow make you successful, I can't even say successful, that the government will satisfy whatever basic needs you have, then that's where you would stay as a basic person, subject to exploitation, subject to being taken advantage of, being vulnerable all the time. And the way to change that is through knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been speaking to Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell. We did some reflection on 2023, looking at the immediate 2024 and the plans of government, and also Vision 2025. I think that 75. I think that's important. Thank you so very much for joining us this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure. Look forward to being with you again next week as we have another discussion on Beyond the Headlines. Take care. Godspeed.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Good.